There are no rules when humans fight in war. Part 2. The first attack came at dawn. Jacob had predicted it. The Xanthi always attacked in the early morning hours when human soldiers were most tired. They believed that timing gave them an advantage. They believed that their superior technology and larger forces meant victory was inevitable. Jacob had other ideas. He had spent the entire night preparing. He had moved his soldiers into defensive positions that made no sense according to the traditional rules of warfare. Instead of spreading them thin to hold as much territory as possible, he had concentrated his forces. Instead of defending the most valuable targets, he had left them seemingly UNDFENDE. Kenneth Park stood beside Jacob in the command center, watching the tactical displays. Xanthi dropships were entering the atmosphere. Xanthi ground troops were preparing to land. "Captain, the Council is broadcasting their opposition to our defensive posture," Kenneth said. "They say we are abandoning standard protocols." Jacob did not answer. He was watching the Xanthi movements carefully. The alien commander was making the same assumptions that every other military officer had made when fighting humans. The Xanthi believed that humans would try to save as many lives as possible by dispersing their forces. The Xanthi believed that humans would mount a logical, mathematical defense. The Xanthi had never fought an enemy that was willing to sacrifice some positions to destroy others. "Send a signal." Jacob commanded. Kenneth nodded and sent the transmission through the secure channel. The signal reached human soldiers, hidden in positions that the Xanthi scanners had not detected. Jacob had trained his soldiers differently. Instead of using technology to hide, he had taught them to use the terrain, deception, and misdirection. The Xanthi dropships were landing in 3 different zones. Their soldiers poured out in organized, efficient formations. They moved with the precision of a military force that had fought wars for 10,000 years. Their weapons were superior. Their armor was stronger. Their numbers were greater. Than the hidden human soldiers opened fire. The first Xanthi formation was surrounded before they even realized they were under attack. Jacob's soldiers used terrain that the Xanthi scanners had missed. They used coordinated fire from multiple angles. They used tactics that the Xanthi Military Academy had never taught as possible. The Xanthi commander, seeing his forces under attack, made the logical decision. He sent reinforcements to save his surrounded soldiers. He committed more forces to break the human encirclement. This was exactly what Jacob wanted. As soon as the reinforcements arrived, Jacob activated the second phase of his plan. The soldiers who had seemed to be defeated in the first position suddenly pulled back, moving to pre-planned coordinates. The Xanthi reinforcements, following what they believed was a retreating enemy, found themselves in terrain that Jacob had prepared specifically for their destruction. Human soldiers emerged from hidden bunkers. They used weapons and explosives placed in advance. They had sacrificed the first position not to save lives, but to kill as many Xanthi as possible. The Xanthi command structure broke. Officers called for retreat. Soldiers attempted to reorganize. But Jacob had planned for this too. Human forces cut off their escape routes. What had seemed like a simple and logical Xanthi victory became a desperate fight for survival. By mid-morning, the Xanthi forces had retreated to their dropships. 300 Xanthi soldiers lay dead on the ground. Jacob had lost 30 soldiers. It was a victory that violated every rule of warfare. Jacob had not tried to minimize his own casualties. He had accepted losses because those losses served a larger strategic purpose. A human commander would never sacrifice 30 of his own soldiers to kill 300 of the enemy, if the primary goal was to minimize casualties. But Jacob's primary goal was not to preserve life. His primary goal was to break the Xanthi will to fight. Dr. Marcus Powell arrived at the command center late that evening. Marcus was a strategic theorist who had spent his life studying alien military tactics. He was thin, sharp-minded, and had a reputation for understanding patterns that others missed. "Captain Hayes, your tactics today were brilliant," Marcus said, but his expression was troubled. They were also deeply unconventional. "The Galactic Council has already filed a complaint." Jacob looked at the strategic displays. The Xalanthi were reorganizing their forces. They were preparing for another attack. "The Xalanthi do not expect us to fight like this," Jacob said. "They expect us to fight logically. They expect us to try to save lives. They expect us to respect the same rules they claim to respect. And if we do not follow the rules?" Marcus asked carefully. Jacob turned to face him. Then the Xalanthi learned that fighting humans is not a logical mathematical problem. It becomes chaos. It becomes unpredictable. It becomes dangerous in ways they do not understand. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood what Jacob was saying. He understood that Jacob was proposing to fight a war where the rules did not apply. A war where human soldiers would make decisions based on victory, not on honor or protocol, or what was acceptable to the galactic community. "The Xalanthi commander is a strategic thinker," Marcus said. "He will adjust his tactics based on what happened today. He will try something different. Then we will prepare for something different," Jacob said. "We will always be 2 steps ahead of what they expect. We will always do the thing that logic says we should not do. We will turn their predictability against them." Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeated. The Xalanthi attacked. Jacob's forces retreated strategically, drawing the Xalanthi into kill zones that had been prepared in advance. Each time, the Xalanthi lost more soldiers. Each time, Jacob's human forces took casualties, but always fewer than the enemy. But more importantly, the Xalanthi were beginning to lose faith in their own superiority. On the 4th day, Kenneth brought Jacob a recording of Xalanthi communications. The aliens were worried. They were using words like unpredictable and dangerous. They were expressing doubt about their commander's strategy. Some of the Xalanthi officers were asking if humans were truly the weak species they had believed them to be. Jacob watched the recording and understood what was happening. The Xalanthi had spent 10,000 years believing that their way of fighting was the superior way. They had crushed civilizations that used different tactics. They had assumed that human dedication to rules and protocols was a sign of weakness. They had never encountered an enemy that abandoned the rules completely. That night, Jacob stood again on the observation deck. He thought about Elena. He thought about the medical center in New Haven. He thought about all the humans who had died because the Xalanthi believed that the rules no longer mattered. Jacob had made his choice. He had abandoned the rules too. And already, the Xalanthi were learning what it meant to face an enemy with nothing left to lose, and no constraints on how they fought. The Xalanthi wanted to break the rules. Jacob would show them what that truly meant. There are no rules when humans fight in war. Part 1. Captain Jacob Hayes stood on the observation deck of the military base on Kepler 442b. Below him, the colony stretched across red soil and brown mountains. Humans had built this place from nothing 2 generations ago. They had faced dangerous storms, alien creatures, and starvation. They had survived through hard work and determination. But now, everything was about to change. The alarm had come through the emergency broadcast system only 12 hours ago. The Xalanthi Empire, a powerful alien civilization from the far side of the galaxy, had declared war on all human colonies. Not through formal channels or diplomatic meetings. They simply attacked. 3 human colonies had been hit first. New Haven, where Jacob's sister Elena worked at the medical center. Harmony Station, where 3,000 colonists lived. Freedomport, the largest trading hub in human space. All 3 were now under Xalanthi control, and the reports coming in were terrible. Jacob reviewed the data on his tablet. His hands felt steady, but his mind was racing. The Xalanthi had targeted schools. They had bombed the medical facilities. They had killed civilians on purpose to break the human will to fight. It was a brutal strategy that violated every rule of war that the galactic community had agreed to follow centuries ago. Lieutenant Kenneth Park approached Jacob with a serious expression. Kenneth had served with Jacob for 8 years. They had trained together, fought together, and trusted each other completely. "Captain, we have a situation," Kenneth said quietly. "The Council wants to respond carefully. They say we must follow the protocols. No civilian targets. No weapons of mass destruction. Fight according to the rules." Jacob turned away from the window. His jaw tightened. The rules. The rules that all civilized species agreed to follow. The rules that made humans appear weak compared to the ancient alien empires who had been fighting wars since before humans discovered fire. "What about Elena?" Jacob asked. He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear it spoken aloud. Kenneth looked down. The medical center in New Haven was hit in the first attack. The casualty reports are still coming in, but the number is high. "Captain, I am sorry." Jacob stood silent for a long moment. Elena had been his younger sister. She had chosen to work as a medical officer to help people. She had wanted to bring healing to the colony. Now she was probably dead because the Xalanthi wanted to send a message to humanity. That message was clear. Humans were weak, and the rules that protected civilized species meant nothing to the Xalanthi. Admiral Patricia Cooper arrived at the base the next day. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of conflict. She had served in the human military for 40 years and had earned the respect of every commander under her command. Jacob met her in the command center. The room was filled with screens showing tactical information about the Xalanthi positions and human defensive capabilities. The news was bad. The Xalanthi had superior numbers, better technology, and control of the space around the 3 colonies. "Captain Hayes," Admiral Cooper said, extending her hand. Jacob shook it firmly. "I have read your service record. You are one of our best field commanders. I need your leadership now." "Thank you, Admiral," Jacob said. "What are our orders?" Admiral Cooper pulled up a map of the region. Red marks showed Xalanthi positions. Blue marks showed human bases and forces. The blue forces looked small and weak. "The Galactic Council has sent formal protests," the Admiral explained. "We have asked the Vlorthi and other ancient species to mediate. We are following the rules of engagement. We will defend our colonies, but we will do so with honor and according to the protocols." Jacob nodded. This was what he expected. Humans had always followed the rules. It was part of what made them acceptable to the galactic community. Many alien species had tried to destroy humanity or enslave it. The only thing that had kept humans alive was their commitment to the rules that everyone followed. But Jacob was beginning to wonder if the rules still mattered. When your enemy refused to follow them, there is something else, Admiral Cooper said. She pulled Jacob aside, away from the other officers. She spoke quietly, but her words were clear and direct. "Off the record, Captain. What happens in battle, what tactics you use, what choices you make to protect your soldiers and your people. That is your decision. That is your responsibility." Jacob understood immediately. The Admiral was telling him something without saying it directly. She was telling him that there was more than one way to fight a war. "Admiral, are you saying—" "I am saying nothing officially," the Admiral interrupted. "I am saying that humanity deserves to survive. I am saying that the Xalanthi have shown us they do not believe in the rules. And I am saying that Captain Jacob Hayes is in command of the front lines. What happens there is his judgment call. She paused and looked Jacob directly in the eyes. Do what needs doing, Captain. Just make sure we win. Jacob left the command center and walked back to the observation deck. The sun was setting over Kepler 442b, turning the sky orange and red. Somewhere out there, the Zalenti were planning their next attack. They were preparing to kill more humans, destroy more colonies, and claim more territory. Somewhere out there, Elena was gone. Jacob pulled up his personal messages. There was one from Elena sent 3 weeks before the attack. She was talking about a new medical protocol she had developed. She was excited about helping more colonists. She was talking about building a better future. That future was dead now. Jacob deleted the message. He could not afford to think about Elena right now. He could not afford to feel the anger and the grief. He needed to think like a commander. He needed to think about how to fight an enemy that had no respect for the rules. He needed to think about how to win, no matter what it took. The soldiers under his command looked to him for leadership. Kenneth Park and the other officers believed in him. The colonists on Kepler 442b believed that Captain Jacob Hayes would protect them. They believed that humanity would follow the rules, fight with honor, and emerge victorious because they were right. But Jacob was beginning to understand something that the Galactic Council did not yet know. Something that would change everything about how humanity fought wars. The rules only work when both sides agree to follow them. When one side abandons the rules, the other side has to make a choice. Follow the rules and lose, or abandon the rules and survive. Jacob made his choice that night as he stood in the darkness, watching the stars above the colony. He would do what needed doing. He would break the rules, and he would make sure that the Zalenti learned that humans were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. When Jacob descended from the observation deck, he had already stopped thinking about what the Galactic Council would approve of. He was thinking only about victory. He was thinking only about making the Zalenti pay for what they had done. And he was thinking about proving to the entire galaxy that there was nothing more dangerous than a human who had nothing left to lose. There are no rules when humans fight in war. Part 3. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. The Vlorithi, who had existed for over 100,000 years, sat in positions of honor. The Kethran, a race of merchants who had avoided conflict for millennia, looked nervous. The Sarlan warriors themselves, but honorable ones, appeared troubled. Victoria Romano, the leader of Earth's representation, stood before the council. She was an older woman with silver hair and a strong voice. She had spent 30 years in diplomacy, building trust between humans and the galactic community. Now, that trust was being questioned. The human forces on Kepler 442b have engaged in tactics that violate the code of conduct, said Zester, a Vlorithi representative. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of ancient authority. They have used deception in ways that we have not seen since the Dark Wars. They have accepted casualties in order to inflict greater casualties on the enemy. They have abandoned the protocols that bind civilized species together. Victoria stepped forward. Her expression was serious. The Zalenti attacked our colonies without warning or formal declaration. They targeted schools and medical centers. They killed civilians on purpose. They broke the rules first. My question to this council is this. When one party abandons the rules, do the rules still exist? The Zalenti are barbarians, said a Kethran representative, a small being with delicate features. But that does not mean humanity should become barbarians as well. That does not mean we abandon civilization itself. Victoria turned to face the Kethran directly. I ask you, distinguished representative, if someone breaks into your home and begins attacking your family, do you follow etiquette rules while defending your children? or do you do whatever is necessary to protect them?" The Kethran had no answer. "The humans have responded to invasion with military action," said a Cylon warrior, his voice deep and steady. "This is not civilized behavior, but I understand it. We too have faced enemies who did not respect the code. We too have had to make difficult choices." On Kepler 442b, Jacob continued his campaign against the Xalanthi. The alien invaders were no longer overconfident. Instead, they were growing desperate. Jacob's unconventional tactics had cost them thousands of soldiers. The Xalanthi commander had lost 7 dropships and 2 orbital support vessels. But the Xalanthi still had superior numbers and technology. Jacob knew that eventually, if the war continued on the ground indefinitely, the Xalanthi would find a way to overcome the human forces through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. Jacob needed to do something that would break the Xalanthi will to fight completely. Dr. Marcus Powell presented the plan to Jacob in the command center. It was bold and dangerous. It was exactly the kind of plan that the rules of warfare had been designed to prevent. "If we move our fastest attack ships here," Marcus said, pointing to the Xalanthi supply route, "we can intercept their supply convoy." The Xalanthi are organized logically. They maintain supply lines with mathematical precision. Without supplies, their forces will begin to fail. "Intercepting supply convoys is permitted under the code," Kenneth noted. "But what Captain Marcus is suggesting is different," Jacob said quietly. He understood the full implications of the plan. "We are not just interrupting supplies. We are deliberately targeting the Xalanthi supply stations on their auxiliary colony. We are cutting off their access to food, water, and medicine. We are forcing them to choose between withdrawal or starvation." It was a tactic that the Code of Conduct permitted only in extreme situations. But the situation on Kepler 442b was extreme. The Xalanthi had made it extreme when they destroyed the medical center. "We will do this," Jacob said. "Begin the operation immediately." The human forces moved with precision and speed. Jacob's attack ships hit the Xalanthi supply stations in a coordinated assault. The aliens had left minimal defensive forces there because they did not believe humans would violate the protocols that protected supply infrastructure. Jacob did not care what humans were supposed to believe. Jacob cared only about victory. Within days, the Xalanthi supply lines began to break down. The soldiers on Kepler 442b found themselves with limited food and water. Medical supplies ran low. The Xalanthi commander sent urgent messages back to his superiors demanding reinforcements and supplies. But the messages that came back were clear. The Xalanthi Empire was not prepared to lose a major supply station to protect an invasion force. The commander was ordered to secure the strategic positions or begin withdrawal. The Xalanthi commander chose withdrawal. It was the first major human victory since the invasion began. The Xalanthi forces left Kepler 442b and moved to strengthen their positions on the other 2 colonies. But word of their retreat spread quickly through human space and throughout the galaxy. Humans had defeated the Xalanthi Empire, not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through tactics and strategy that the Xalanthi had never expected on Earth. Victoria Romano received a message from Dr. Sarah Knight, a human ambassador and strategic theorist. Sarah had been preparing a speech for the Galactic Council. It was a speech that would change how the entire galactic community viewed humanity. When Sarah took the stand before the council, she spoke with quiet confidence. The chamber fell silent to listen. "Distinguished members of the council," Sarah began, "humanity did not want to abandon the rules. We built these rules alongside you. We signed the Code of Conduct because we believed in the principles that underlie it. But the Xalanthi taught us an important lesson. The rules only work when both sides agree to follow them." Sarah paused, letting her words sink in. When the Zelenthi attacked our children in schools and wounded in hospitals, they decided that the rules no longer applied. We simply learned that lesson faster than they expected. We chose survival. We chose to fight as if our lives depended on it. Because they did. And now, Sarah continued, we face a choice as a galactic community. We can condemn humanity for responding to invasion with unconventional tactics. Or we can recognize that sometimes the rules themselves are fragile. They only protect those who respect them. And when an enemy shows they have no respect for the rules collapse. Victoria watched from the human section as the council began to murmur. Some representatives looked troubled. Others looked thoughtful. Some looked at humans differently than they had. Before Sarah finished her speech, with words that would be repeated in human colonies and among alien species for years to come. Humanity never wanted to break the rules. We invented them alongside you. But when our children were targeted, when our people were killed for sport and intimidation, we made a choice. We chose survival. And we proved that humans can do more than just follow the rules. We can break them. And we can still be civilized. We can still be better than those who forced us to fight. The question now is what the galaxy will do with this knowledge. The chamber erupted in debate. The Vlarathi called for stricter enforcement of the code. The Sarlan acknowledged that humans had fought as warriors do. The Catherine looked nervous about what this meant for galactic stability. But something had changed. Humanity was no longer viewed as the obedient, rule-following species that the galaxy could depend on to follow orders. Humanity was viewed as something far more dangerous, a species that could break the rules and win. And that knowledge terrified some and impressed others in equal measure. There are no rules when humans fight in war. Part 4. The final battle for Kepler 442b took place over 3 days. The Zelenthi, realizing that supply lines had been cut and that human tactics were becoming increasingly unpredictable, decided to make one massive push to defeat Jacob's forces completely. If they could crush the human resistance, they could re-establish their position. If they could not, they would have to abandon all 3 colonies. The Zelenthi fleet descended on the colony with overwhelming force. Thousands of soldiers poured from orbital transports. Massive weapon systems carved into the red earth. The Zelenthi fought with the desperation of an empire facing defeat. Jacob's human forces fought with the desperation of people protecting their homes. The battle was brutal and bloody. Human soldiers died in large numbers. The Zelenthi weapons technology was superior, and for every Zelenthi that fell, 2 or 3 humans fell beside them. But Jacob had arranged his defenses carefully. He had studied the Zelenthi commander's tactics and understood the patterns in how he made decisions. Jacob used that knowledge to trap the Zelenthi forces. When the alien commander sent his strongest forces forward, Jacob's forces pulled back, drawing them into a valley where human soldiers had positioned themselves on the surrounding heights. When the Zelenthi moved to secure the northern passage, Jacob struck from the south with an attack force that the Zelenthi command structure had not anticipated. By the second day of battle, the Zelenthi were losing. By the third day, their commander understood that he had lost. The Zelenthi forces on Kepler 442b withdrew to their remaining dropships and escaped into space. Jacob's soldiers did not chase them. They were too exhausted. They had lost too much. Over 800 human soldiers lay dead. Another 1,500 were wounded. The colony itself was damaged. Buildings were destroyed. The red soil of Kepler 442b was stained with human blood. But the Zelenthi were gone. Jacob walked through the colony in the aftermath of the battle. He moved past the destroyed buildings and the makeshift medical stations where human doctors worked without sleep, trying to save as many lives as they could. He moved past soldiers sitting in shock, Unable to process the horror they had witnessed, he moved toward the memorial that had been established for the casualties of the medical center bombing. It had been expanded now to include the names of everyone who had died in the battle. Kenneth Park found Jacob there, standing in front of the expanding list of names. Kenneth himself had a bandage on his shoulder where shrapnel had struck him. His uniform was stained with blood and dirt. "Captain," Kenneth said quietly, "the Xalanthi are retreating from all 3 colonies. We have one." Jacob looked at the names on the memorial. 800 human soldiers. Thousands of colonists who had been killed before the battle even began. He thought about Elena's name on that list somewhere. "Yes," Jacob said. "We have one." But his voice was empty. Captain Linda Foster approached them. Linda had been with Jacob since the first battle. She had fought hard and smart. She had made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost lives. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes looked haunted. "Captain, I need to talk to you," Linda said. They moved away from the memorial, finding an empty building to sit in. The walls were damaged, but still standing. "What happened during the battle?" Linda began carefully. "What we did to the Xalanthi in the valley. We had them surrounded. They had nowhere to go. They were trying to surrender." Jacob said nothing. "We fired on them anyway," Linda continued. "They were attempting to wave the flag of surrender, and we fired on them. I gave the order. You authorized it. We killed them when they were helpless." Jacob looked at Linda directly. "They attacked our colony. They killed civilians." "I know," Linda said, and her voice was steady but sad. "I am not saying it was wrong. I'm saying that we did it. I am saying that we went into that war saying we would break the rules, and we did break them. We did things that civilized species do not do. And now I need to know if you believe that there are no rules in war, or if you believe something different." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the Xalanthi soldiers in the valley. He thought about Elena. He thought about the 800 human soldiers whose names were being added to the memorial. "I do not know," Jacob said finally. "I know we survived. I know the Xalanthi will not invade us again. I know that every decision I made, every rule I broke, accomplished a military objective. But I also know that we became something different in this war. We became something that I do not fully recognize." Linda nodded slowly. "The Galactic Court has demanded that you answer for your tactics. They are calling it a war crimes tribunal. They want to know if you violated the protocols intentionally." "I did," Jacob said. "I made the decision to break the rules. I made the decision that survival was more important than honor. I made the decision to do whatever was necessary to win." Linda stood up to leave. "I hope it was worth it," she said quietly. "I hope that saving Kepler 442b was worth the price we paid. Not just in lives, but in what we became." Over the following weeks, Jacob visited the different sections of the colony that had been damaged. He saw human engineers and colonists working to rebuild. He saw families grieving for the people they had lost. He saw children who had survived this Xalanthi invasion and would now grow up knowing that their safety had been purchased with violence and unconventional warfare. He thought about whether Linda's question could actually be answered. Was any victory worth the price of becoming something you did not recognize? Jacob received a message from Admiral Patricia Cooper. She had been reassigned and was now stationed at Earth. The message was brief. You did what had to be done. That is the burden of command. The Xalanthi needed to learn that humans are not what they believed. That lesson has been taught. Now comes the hard part. Now comes the rest of your life, knowing what you are capable of. Jacob sat in his quarters and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Xalanthi Empire was healing from its loss. Somewhere out there, alien species were discussing whether humans had become too dangerous. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was preparing a trial. But here on Kepler 442b, in the dust and red soil, where Elena had wanted to build a better future, humans were rebuilding. They were mourning. They were recovering. They were moving forward into a new world where everyone understood that they had teeth and knew how to use them. Jacob had broken the rules to protect his people. He had achieved victory through tactics that violated centuries of galactic protocol. He had proven that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had believed, and he would carry that knowledge for the rest of his life, knowing that it had cost him something that could never be recovered. There are no rules when humans fight in war. Part 5. The Galactic Court convened on a neutral station called Harmony, which orbited no planet and belonged to no single empire. The court was the highest judicial body in the galaxy, established 10,000 years ago to settle disputes between civilizations and to hold accountable those who violated the fundamental laws of galactic conduct. Jacob Hayes stood before the court, knowing that his actions during the war on Kepler 442b were about to be judged. The trial had lasted for 3 weeks. Witnesses had testified about the tactics Jacob had used. Evidence had been presented showing the ways in which human forces had violated the code of conduct. The prosecutor, a Vlorthy judge named Kester, was asking for severe penalties. Some species were calling for Jacob to be executed as a war criminal, but Jacob did not feel like a criminal. He felt like a soldier who had done what had to be done. The final arguments were being presented. Kester stood before the court and spoke with the weight of galactic authority behind him. Captain Jacob Hayes knowingly and deliberately violated the code of conduct, Kester stated. He ordered the destruction of supply stations that were protected under the protocols. He ordered his soldiers to fire on enemy forces that were attempting to surrender. He used deception and psychological warfare in ways that were prohibited by the laws that govern all civilized species. Kester paused and looked directly at Jacob. The question before this court is whether the pressure of invasion justifies the abandonment of civilization itself. If we accept the defense that extreme circumstances allow us to break the rules, then the rules have no meaning. If we allow humanity to escape punishment for these violations, then we tell every species in the galaxy that the rules do not matter. Captain Jacob Hayes must be held accountable. There was silence in the court chamber. Jacob's defense team was excellent, but even they looked troubled. The evidence was clear. Jacob had violated the rules. The only question was how the court would respond to that violation. Then Victoria Romano stood up to make the final defense argument. She moved to the center of the court chamber and looked at the judges seated above her. The Vlorthy, the Sarlin, the Kethrin, and representatives from a dozen other species all watched her carefully. Honored judges, Victoria began. I do not dispute the evidence. Captain Jacob Hayes broke the rules. He knew he was breaking them. He deliberately chose to break them. But I want to ask this court something important. When one party abandons the rules, when they use the rules as a shield while violating them, do the rules still exist? Or do they simply become tools of oppression for those who respect them and safety for those who do not? Victoria pointed to evidence displays showing the Xalanthi attack on the medical center. The Xalanthi attacked a protected facility. They killed medical personnel and civilians. They did not hesitate. They did not apologize. They did not claim they were following some higher logic. They simply decided that the rules did not apply to them. Captain Hayes faced a choice, Victoria continued. He could follow the rules, respect the code of conduct, and lose the war. His colony would be conquered. His people would be enslaved or killed. Thousands of humans would die so that this court could say that at least humans maintained their honor. Or he could break the rules and save his people. And here's the truth that I want this court to understand, Victoria said. her voice becoming stronger. Captain Hayes chose to break the rules, but he did not break them randomly. He did not abandon civilized behavior. He fought using tactics that were effective, but he did not cross certain lines. He fought to win, not to destroy for the sake of destruction. He proved that you can break rules for tactical advantage without becoming an animal. The Xalanthi expected humans to follow the rules even when the enemy did not. The Xalanthi believed that would make humans weak and easy to defeat. Captain Hayes proved them wrong. And in proving them wrong, he taught an important lesson to the entire galaxy. The rules only work when both sides respect them. Victoria paused and looked at each of the judges. So I asked this court, do you punish humanity for learning to survive? Do you take the lesson of Kepler 442b and say that humans will be destroyed if they ever again choose survival over obedience to rules that only bind the honorable? The court chamber was silent. Castor looked angry, but even he had no response to Victoria's words. The judges took 3 days to reach their verdict. Jacob waited in a small room, not knowing if he would walk out free or if he would be sentenced to death or imprisonment. He thought about Elena. He thought about the 800 soldiers who had died. He thought about Linda Foster's question, was it worth it? The judges returned. Kester made the announcement. This court finds that Captain Jacob Hayes violated the code of conduct. He is guilty of the charges presented against him. However, this court also recognizes that the Xalanthi Empire violated the code of conduct first, and that Captain Hayes' actions were taken in direct response to that violation. The judge paused, and Jacob held his breath. Captain Jacob Hayes is not sentenced to death or imprisonment. However, Captain Jacob Hayes must understand that his actions have consequences for the entire galaxy. Those consequences are not being imposed by this court today. They are being imposed by history itself. Jacob was released from the court, but he understood what the judges were really saying. He had won his freedom, but humanity had changed. The rules had changed, and the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. Victoria and Jacob walked together from the court chamber to the station's viewing platform. They looked out at the stars, at the vast emptiness of space that separated the many civilizations that made up the galactic community. What happens now? Jacob asked. Now, Victoria said, the galaxy begins to rebuild the rules. But this time, the rules will have teeth. The code of conduct will be rewritten to protect civilians and medical facilities with real enforcement. Species who violate these rules will face coordinated response from the entire galactic community. Your sacrifice, and the sacrifice of those who died on Kepler 442b, it will change how all civilizations fight wars. Jacob returned to human space with new responsibilities. Admiral Patricia Cooper promoted him to the rank of general and gave him command of a new institution, the Human Institute of Military Ethics. The institute's purpose was to train commanders from multiple alien species to fight with both effectiveness and integrity. Jacob worked alongside Dr. Marcus Powell to build this institute. They taught other species how to fight unconventional enemies without abandoning all sense of morality. They taught that there was a difference between breaking rules for tactical advantage and becoming a savage. They taught that humans had found that difference during the war on Kepler-442b. On the first anniversary of the Xalanthi withdrawal, Jacob returned to Kepler 442b. He went to the expanded memorial that listed all the names of those who had died during the invasion and the war. He found Elena's name and placed his hand on it. Linda Foster found him there. She had left the military and was now living on the colony, working to help it rebuild. She looked healthier than she had on the day after the final battle. She looked like she had found some peace. Captain Hayes, Linda said. Good to see you. General now, Jacob said with a slight smile. But old friends call me Jacob. They stood together in silence for a moment, looking at the names. The red sun of Kepler 442b was setting, turning the sky the color of blood. Somehow, that seemed fitting for a memorial to the dead. Was it worth it? Linda asked. She had asked the same question months ago, but now the tone of her voice was different. She was not asking in pain or doubt. She was asking with genuine curiosity. Jacob thought about the answer carefully. He thought about the galactic protocols that had been rewritten. He thought about the Human Institute of Military Ethics, where commanders from different species were learning to fight justly. He thought about the Galactic Coalition's new commitment to actually enforcing the rules that protected civilians. I think, Jacob said slowly, that we paid a terrible price for an important lesson. We learned that rules only matter if everyone follows them. We learned that humans can break rules and still be civilized. We learned that sometimes you have to become something darker to protect what you love. And the galaxy learned that humans are far more dangerous than they believed. But more importantly, Jacob continued, the galaxy learned something else. The Xeonthi expected us to break under pressure. They expected us to lose everything. But humans did not break. We adapted. We changed. We did what had to be done. And then we used our victory to build something better than what we had before. Linda nodded. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had seen the true cost of war, who had crossed lines they never expected to cross, and who had survived to understand what those crossings meant. Jacob thought about how the Galactic Council now spoke of humanity with a mixture of respect and fear. He thought about how other species now paid attention when human commanders made decisions. He thought about how the rules themselves were being rewritten to account for what humans had learned. There are no rules when humans fight in war. That had been the lesson of Kepler 442b. But there should be rules. There should be standards.